Okay, cool. Episode 4, right? David Fincher deep dive. We're doing Fight Club. Welcome, Chase. You just logged in. Awesome. You are sideways though. I don't know if you want to mess with your camera. Cool. So we're doing Fight Club tonight. I'm gonna kick things off, and I'd like to start this off. Last time it was kind of interesting because none of us had seen the game before, and so it was kind of I wanted to open up with like first impressions of what the game was. This movie we've all seen before. You know, this isn't our first time through. Actually, Justin, it might be yours, but we can hang on that for a second. I have what I think is a really cool Fight Club story, like how I was introduced to it. My first interaction with the story, not even the movie, but you know, just the lore and the like culture surrounding it. And I want to go through each one of us and maybe take 3 or 4 minutes each and just kind of tell us about your first experience with Fight Club, even if it's just, you know, watching the movie and the twist at the end really threw you for a loop. I'm going to start off because I was thinking about it, you know, this past week in preparation for this discussion. And I went down memory lane, and it was so much fun because my brothers know this. I've always been like, and I just discovered this a couple of years ago about myself, like being self-aware, but all my life I've been drawn to chaotic people, like people who are just crazy. Like early days in Flagstaff, Arizona, it was Brig Sorensen. He was all over the place. He was jumping off the walls. He was a wild man. And I remember like in church seeing him and being like, I want to be friends with that kid. Like he's all over the place. Like he's bouncing off the wall. I like him. And, you know, me and Brig were friends all the way through high school, still friends today. And then, you know, Eldon Brooks, he'd always be like jumping off, you know, rooftops and like a really hardcore skateboarder. And he was just like reckless and always getting hurt and always had cuts on his face. And I was just like, that's a wild man. I want to be friends with him. We became best friends. College years, I met Daniel Brownie, who's in this chat right now. And, you know, we're in the same ward and I'm just like, oh, he's a nice chap. And then I'm living beneath him and I get to know him a little bit. I'm like, oh, this guy like gets into fights. He's got kind of a short fuse. He's super loyal to his friends. He's a chaotic dude. And I was just like magnetized towards that. Like all my life, I've always loved, I don't want to be the chaos, but I always love being associated with like a chaotic person or a chaotic personality or like a wild, like I've just always been drawn to it. So anyway, when I was 15, so Fight Club had come out 2 years before. So this is the year 2001. And, you know, Brig Sorensen, who I just mentioned, Brig, me, and Jesse Newman, you guys remember Jesse Newman, we were like the three amigos when we were teenagers. And we were at like some church youth activity or something on a Wednesday night. And they had a sleepover that I was invited to, but mom and dad wouldn't let me go. But they watched Fight Club in that sleepover. I totally missed out on like them watching like the DVD of Fight Club, and they had like snuck it. They were at the Newman's house, and so you know this Wednesday night they're like all they could talk about was Fight Club, and I hadn't seen the movie. And we go outside, we all take our shirts off, and we start fight. We started a Fight Club. We're like 3 15-year-old dudes, and we're like on the lawn in like the church parking lot essentially, and we all take off our shirts. It's like 9 o'clock at night, it's dark, and we had a rule that we could only do like 2 face hits and the rest had to be body shots, but it was like a full contact fight. And so like, and I was into it, and I was like, oh, this is so dope. And I'm like, this is like Fight Club. And they started talking a little bit about like the philosophy and Tyler Durden, this type of stuff, and we were just like fighting on like the church lawn with our shirts off at nighttime, just punching each other. And it was so much fun. It was just like this testosterone-filled chaos that I really leaned into. And I remember being surprised because when mom and dad saw Fight Club, you know, in the theaters 2 years before, I was like, oh, I want to see Fight Club. I was like 13 or 14. And in their parental protection, I remember my mom telling me specifically, she's like, it wasn't even about fighting. It was like about, I don't know, politics or something. And I was immediately turned off. Like it worked, you know, it's like she deviated my interest. I was no longer interested in watching Fight Club. I'm like, oh, it's not about fighting. I don't want to watch it. And so I kind of put it out of my brain because my mom was like, I guess, protecting me from a, you know, inappropriate movie or whatever. But then when Brig and Jesse introduced it to me, I was like, oh, I actually there's fighting in it. And it's about an actual fight club. I totally want to watch the movie. And then eventually I saw it, and it was a phenomenal movie. And it's probably, I think I've told you guys, it's like top 10 favorite movies personally for me. It's just like it hits so many beats, and we'll get into it obviously. But that's my first exposure to Fight Club. Super awesome, super fun, and super memorable, like memorable in terms of the impact that it had on me before I even saw the movie. And I think that also speaks to the impact the movie had culturally, not just cinematically. Callum, what was your first exposure to Fight Club?
So I was born in '95. Fight Club came out in '99. So what, 4 years old then, when Fight Club comes out. But I've got, like you guys and your family, I've got all brothers, you know. So I've got 4 older brothers, and they were all on the Fight Club train. They had the book that they read, and then they loved the movie as well. So I don't know exactly how old I was when I first watched Fight Club, but I was between the ages of 8 and 10, I'm sure. And it was obviously no comprehension at all of what's going on, but just seeing the gore and the violence and these guys that were ripped and just bloody knocking each other out and things like that, you know, it was amazing. So I was just on the ride for that as a young pup, which is actually kind of funny because one of the best lines in the movie was when what was her name again? Her name's, oh geez,
Marla.
Aye, when Marla said, "I've not been like that since grade school." First time I watched this movie, I was pretty much in grade school, you know. So I was like, "This is amazing." But then, like, every single time after it, see, because I loved it so much and I didn't understand anything about it, I just liked what I saw. Every single time I watched it afterwards, I was mind blown again because I thought, I love this movie. I've seen it. It's amazing. I know everything about it. Yeah, I'll watch it again. I'm up for watching some fighting again. And then I comprehend a little bit more. And then I comprehend a little bit more. And last week when we or was it last week we done our last one? Straight after that, I turned on Fight Club and I watched all of it. And then a couple of days ago, I watched all of it again. And like in preparation for this tonight, I've been like, I'm so excited. I want to watch it again after after this call. It's I said this last week, but Fight Club is the movie that made me fall in love with movies. To me, it's a perfect movie, one of the best that I've ever seen, and I will continue I will continue to look forward to watching Fight Club as many times as I watch it for the rest of my life. It's one of those movies I can just watch it non-stop. It's amazing.
Love that, Callum. And yeah, that I was the same way. I was like I just finished it yesterday, and I was like, I could watch it again in 2 days. It's just one of those movies. Brownie, there's pretty much, I would say 18 months doesn't go by in my life without either you sending me a Tyler Durden clip on Instagram or me sending you a Tyler Durden clip on Instagram. And I feel like it just resonates with you the same way it resonates with me. What was your first experience with Fight Club?
Yeah, I first saw Fight Club back in high school. Went in, cold turkey, didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I would say that is the whole reason why I end up getting in fights. That's what sparked me. That's what I knew. That's how you feel alive. So yeah, and I like Callum, kind of have at least this past week had the same experience where I've watched Fight Club now twice. And it's just, every time I feel like every time you watch it, you get something new. It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful movie, and the quotes never get old. There's so many good one-liners. There's so many good speeches in it. so many that are, timeless, and it's so applicable to us even today. So yeah, it's a movie I want to watch over and over and over again.
Alan, we pretty much had the same childhood growing up. Do you remember that anecdote I said about mom and dad? And it happened more than once, by the way. It happened with Fight Club because mom knew that I was really into action movies and I was a martial artist. And so I was really like anything action, especially R-rated, like I was into. And so I think mom and dad strategically tried to deviate our interests because, it's gory and it had a sex scene and, like they're trying to prevent us from watching this movie. So they downplayed its greatness. Dad did the same thing with Gladiator. He was like, I fell asleep in the first 10 minutes. And you're like, during the most epic battle ever shot on film, you fell asleep. I don't understand. He's like, it was a boring movie. I'm like, no, it wasn't. You just didn't want us to watch an R-rated movie. You're trying to discourage us from watching Gladiator. Do you remember that by chance, or was it? Because I don't remember if you were part of the conversation, but I am curious to know, when was the first time you saw Fight Club? Because I actually don't know.
So first, I'll go ahead and say, yeah, mom and dad were notorious for downplaying an R-rated movie, and to the point where they would just flat out lie to us about what was in the movie and why we couldn't watch it. Like for instance, True Lies. Do you remember when Dad had the VHS copy of True Lies? Wouldn't let us watch it, and so we slid the plastic so that we could open it, and so it wouldn't look like it was ever opened, and we watched it. And I remember Dad lied to us. He said that the reason that we couldn't watch that movie was because at one point in the movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger or somebody's shooting it at somebody's feet, and then they're yelling F F F F F or something like that. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, that's not so bad. And then we watched the movie, and it was clearly for Jamie Lee Curtis's strip scene that he didn't want us to watch it, but he didn't tell us that. And he did the same thing with Terminator 2. I definitely remember it with Gladiator. And I don't specifically remember it about this movie, but it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Anyway, okay, my experience with Fight Club. I was a product of the media campaign leading, when the movie came out in 99, right? We've talked about this before where 99 was like the magic year for movies. Like there were so many good movies, and we're not the only ones. Like lots of people have kind of recognized this, that 99 was a killer year for movies. And the media campaign was like, it pushed the Fight Club agenda, which, I mean, just the fighting, right? Not what the movie was actually about, just the fighting. And I found out later that David Fincher was actually really pissed about that. He's like, that's not what the movie's about. And the writer, I forget the writer of the book, was also kind of disappointed that the marketing campaign for the movie was just promoting the fighting. Anyway, it worked really well for me because, excuse me, because that's like, grown up about the same time, that's what was cool, right? UFC was just starting to become like a thing, and everybody was like getting into fighting and all that kind of stuff. However, I did not see it until, again, this is another military story. It was like probably my first or second deployment, and I'm pretty sure I watched it alone. I don't think I watched it with anybody. But my favorite story about Fight Club, and we probably should have started with this, hashtag whole bunch of spoilers, and we recognize the rule that you don't talk about Fight Club. Rule number 1. My favorite story about my personal experience about this is that it must have been close to 8 to 9 years after the movie came out, and it had not been spoiled for me. And what I loved about it, the realization when I watched this movie, I was like, people who watched this movie took that first rule, that first and second rule, like to heart. Like nobody told me about it. People had talked up the movie and said, like, oh, you need to see this movie. It's a really good movie. It's so epic, yada, yada, yada. But nobody spoiled it. And I remember watching it for the first time, and I was like, what? How has this been so long that I haven't seen this movie and it was not spoiled for me? And so the ending like legitimately threw me by surprise. And I think what makes the movie like so rewatchable, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, but I won't take up too much time because we'll get to some other people's experiences. But even watching it this week, same as Callum and Brownie, I was like, looking forward to tonight. I'm like, cool, we're gonna watch it again. I'm like, wait, we're not watching this together. We're talking about it. And I was like slightly disappointed earlier today when I was like, oh, I'm not watching it with them. All right, we'll just talk about it.
Chase, I'm gonna guess, and I'll let you tell your story, but I'm just gonna guess that you first saw Fight Club in the shanty with Jacob Newman. Am I right or wrong?
Close. It was with Sterling. I was living in the shanty, but it was in Sterling's basement. Same time period. But yeah, it was one of those. Sterling introduced me. I'm pretty sure. That first year of college was a movie revolution for me. I mean, I feel like I had seen a lot of movies up until that point, but that first year was right, because I had Sterling. Like, and Sterling's a great like movie collector. Right. You know, sometimes we'd watch a movie. I'm like, what are we watching? He's like, like The Fountain is one of my key examples. You know, for better or worse. But yeah, it was so my first like rub with it was in like 6th grade. There was this kid, Jake, and he was, I don't even remember his last name, but Jake the Snake. He played football, right? He like, you know, did whatever. And I just remember his parents let him watch R-rated movies, like for whatever he wanted, right? And so there's this like 11, 12-year-old kid on the school ground or on the playground talking about first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. And that was it. And so like my first memory of Fight Club was on the playground in like 6th grade, and Jake talking about the first rule of Fight Club. And that was it. And then it wasn't until like 6 years later, I actually got around to watching it. And yeah, you know, I think my freshman year of college, I probably watched it at least half a dozen times. Like it is a phenomenal movie. And then for Sterling's bachelor party, for Marcus Hancock's bachelor party, they're like, what should we do? I'm like, we got to watch Fight Club. Like, it is a guy movie. It is the pinnacle of guy movies. So we're going to sit down, we're going to watch Fight Club. And so that's kind of been my going experience. And, you know, as Alan said, it's one of the, or as everybody said so far, right? It's one of those movies where I probably watch it at least once a year because it's so good and it's so rewatchable. And there's just tons of themes that I absolutely love as a movie lover. So yeah, but yeah, freshman year, I'm like 99% sure it was with Sterling in his dingy basement, probably eating Little Caesars and drinking Mountain Dew, like we would do about 50% of the time.
So Sterling showed you the movie, but Jake the Snake was the one who first told you. You know, it's interesting. I mean, we've all kind of, it seems to be a common theme that the reputation of the movie was almost larger than the movie itself, which is pretty cool, which again speaks to how great the movie actually is. Drew, give us your experience.
I don't remember where I was when I watched the first one. And here's why. Because by the time I was watching the movie, like everybody else had already seen it. So I was just kind of leftover where it's like, I was like, oh, should I watch Fight Club? And the answer is, you don't talk about Fight Club. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I didn't watch it, but I don't remember. But this is twofold. One, it's a good thing because I know I had seen it before, so like I knew the ending and whatnot. But watching it as an adult, maybe, I don't know, like first time with an adult brain, maybe like 8 to 10 years ago. Obviously fantastic, and I loved it, loved every minute of it. But second, it's not my story, but I'm close enough that I can claim it. And my favorite story about it is our little brother Zane. He was like an adult. He was like maybe 19, 20. And we started talking about Fight Club, and then Like we just were like, oh yeah, Fight Club, it's an awesome movie. And then the next time we saw it, we were all together. Zane like burst into the room and he's like, how did you guys follow the first rule of Fight Club for my entire life? Like how did the entire world follow the first rule of Fight Club? And I had no idea about this movie. And all of us, we didn't like go, oh, you saw it finally. Like it was nothing like that. We all kind of like smirked at ourselves and we were like, yeah, we followed the rules of Fight Club. And it was kind of one of those things that I thought it was just because we were a house full of boys, and come to find out it's like a well-known thing that you just don't talk about it. Like it's your own little secret. And I thought it was like our little secret, but it's the world's little secret. And I can't think of another movie that has had that kind of impact on society. What better way to stop spoilers for people like Sterling and people like Gina who like feed off that energy of spoiling movies? Like what better way than to put it in the movie itself? We don't talk about Fight Club. And then you want to be part of Fight Club, so you don't talk about Fight Club. It's beautiful.
Drew, I'd like to remind you that you are on record, sir. And so when you say Gina, the world needs to know that's your mother. That's our mother. All right. So let there be no confusion. When our great grandchildren are watching this video 80 years from now, like you are one of us. Don't try to disassociate by calling her Gina. Like you are better than the rest of us.
No. Here's the thing. Gina is when she does something bad. Mom is when she does something good. Now, since I am on record, let's count how many times I say mom.
Okay. That's fair enough.
Mom bought a new houseboat. Yeah. Gina spoiled this.
Dad bought a new houseboat. Let's do it. Mom's gonna make Dad remodel the new house.
And it's not gonna be quick enough for Mom.
Right.
Either.
And it'll be wrong, and they'll have to remodel it again next year.
Yeah. Dude,
the hen wants the bread without having to pick the grain or grind the grain or make the dough. Yeah.
Well, Chase, that's a reference that exactly 3 people on the planet would understand. So thanks for bringing that up. Now, Drew, I love what you said about introducing the movie to Zane, because there's something about, I don't know, I'm going to coin a phrase here, and maybe we can come up with a better phrase, but a vicarious first experience. That's such a real thing with movies. Like if you've seen a movie a 1,000 times, it's like so good. Like I'll watch it if it's really that good. I'll watch it alone, but it's so much better if you can find somebody that's never seen it and you can introduce the movie. And in a movie like this, Drew had another experience, which we don't have to go into depth right now, but same watching the Terminator franchise with Zane, Terminators 1 and 2. Again, we'll probably get there someday, but talk about an amazing like vicarious firsthand experience to like introduce somebody to a movie and then watch in real time as you know the twist at the end of Fight Club, for example. That's just such a sweet feeling. Justin, you're the one person that had not seen Fight Club before this discussion, before we had planned to have this discussion. Give us your first impression as a 40-year-old, first time seeing Fight Club. What was it like for you? I'm curious.
First of all, I would just like to say thank you for calling me a 40-year-old, because I'm 41 now. But when I saw the movie, I was 40, because it was like the day before my birthday. So, and me being a beta male, just get kicked around. So it was not as joyful experience as all you alpha males. I felt like, the concrete most of the time, that I don't know if you guys noticed this, but it seemed like Edward Norton hit the concrete a lot in this movie. It didn't do a lot of winning. There was definitely, I can't believe that I didn't have any memes. There are no memes that came across my 41 years. There's no, somehow I knew part of the ending, but I only know like a 1 second, there's the same person. That was it. So as far as spoilers goes, I was looking out for it, but my eyes were like wide open to everything related to that, but it was way different than I actually thought it would be, especially when I've known about Fight Club since I was 16 years old, but not knowing anything about Fight Club. Even now, I'm racking my brain going, fighting is about 10% of this movie, maybe 15. It's so much width and breadth more than I thought. And just one more thing, I'm getting a little parched. So I'm just gonna crack open a can of liquid death here. Way better. Oh, thank you, liquid death. So it's amazing to me how well it's like a well-kept secret still to this day. Like if you haven't had brothers or somebody explaining to you, watching it to you, or recommending it to you, it still flies under the radar, even how widespread it is.
I just hope that Justin doesn't try and get a sponsorship from manscaped.com, you know what I'm saying?
Being the beta male he is, I wouldn't be surprised. Listen, we've all kind of touched on how the first rule of Fight Club was, and Chase, we'll get to you in just a second, sorry, was like applied to the ending of this movie pretty well. I just would like to note, and I'm sure you guys have all heard this, but you know, the whole Rosie O'Donnell thing. I don't remember it in real time, but I've heard about it since, that she actually was so disgusted with the movie and so put out by it that she, on her talk show, spoiled the ending while it was in theaters. Brad Pitt said in the DVD commentary that was an unforgivable sin that Rosie O'Donnell committed. So yeah, everybody except Rosie O'Donnell apparently respected the first two rules of Fight Club. Chase, what were you about to say?
So basically, only fat chicks didn't see the movie. Sorry.
And that's rude. Was she fat back then?
Yeah.
Rosie O'Donnell.
Remember Sister Act? No, that was Whoopi Goldberg. Never mind.
Different view member.
Yeah. So Justin may not have been aware of the memes that have circulated. Now I've been all right. So I saw Fight Club when, you know, like internet was still new. I don't know, like videos. Like I remember when YouTube turned on in like 2005 or whatever. And so I get that like Justin isn't aware because he wasn't like plugged in. He didn't know. And so a lot of the memes and cultural references completely fly under the radar unless you know. So I'll point out a couple of the ones that have circulated for the last decade or so. So, right, clearly the first one is first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. The second one is splicing frames into video. You see that like pretty frequently. The third meme you'll see is the Brad Pitt where his face gets all distorted. You see that sometimes when people are talking about like panic attacks or like the world crushing in on him, they'll use that meme to vibrate. You also have his name is Robert Paulson, like, and so I remember, you know, 6-7 years ago on like Imgur, right, where like something would happen and then like the community would all start like chanting the same thing and it would always like divert to his name is Robert Paulson. His name is Robert Paulson, and everybody's just replying, and you have thousands of people just repeating that. And then the other one that's fairly popular is the smiley face with the burning eyes and the smile when they burn the building. That one you'll see occasionally referenced or used as like a reaction GIF. So again, right? Like if Justin only saw it this last week, he probably missed any time somebody referenced it because they're all super like minute and small because nobody wants to talk about like the big stuff. It's all these like little things. So the distortion, his name is Robert Paulson, the smiling face, right? Like so they exist. They're just obscure and they're usually like these like frame, images that ruin nothing of the movie. But if you know, you know.
Yeah,
Brownie.
and I might have seen any of those things and just going over my head because there's no relation to this movie unless you've seen the movie.
Brownie, I have a question for you. This next question's for you, all right? I'm going to read you a Tyler Durden quote. I'm going to give some context. I want you to respond to it. This is in the parking lot, that first scene where Tyler and the narrator first get in their fight, and they're a little bit drunk. Narrator says, "What do you want me to do? You want me to just hit you?" Tyler Durden says, "Come on, do me this one favor." Narrator says, "Why? Why? I don't know why. I don't know. I've never been in a fight. You? No, but that's a good thing." No, it is not. How much can you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight? I don't want to die without any scars. So come on, hit me before I lose my nerve. That scene, it's so iconic. And it's like a picture's worth 1,000 words. That scene is worth 1,000,000 words. Brownie, you've been in more organic fights than anybody I've ever met in my life. Like, I'm a martial artist, so I've done like sparring matches and stuff, but like legitimate street fights with strangers. I've never met somebody that's been in more physical conflict than you. And that was just in the short, from college moving forward. Who knows what shenanigans you got into high school. Would you agree with that statement from Tyler Durden that, or by that like observation, how much can you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight? Brownie, you might know more about yourself than any person in this chat because of that one singular fact about your life. Speak to that. Is that true? Is there any truth to that? What have you learned from your physical altercations as an adult?
I mean, certainly you learn how to handle yourself, right? You learn that, you're not just going to get knocked out after that first hit. And then you certainly know not to go into fights against Polynesians because that's just a lose-lose situation. And that was one of those moments I had to learn the hard way. Getting your shirt pulled over your head and just uppercutted 10 times and hoping that your friends are going to come rescue you. Definitely. I mean, that scene is just so beautiful. It definitely resonates. It's definitely real. I definitely feel it applies. It definitely applies to real life.
Callum, we'll get to you in just a sec. I just want to finish the capstone of that story. I was there. It was a soccer game. Brownies players started pushing our friend Nate Daly. Brownie sprints out into the field and clocks one of them. Somebody from the opposing team, who's a big Polynesian dude, grabs Brownie, does exactly what he just said, pulls his shirt over him, starts uppercutting. Brownie covers up, and he's literally. I find out later after the fact, because me and our buddy Chad, we start sprinting onto the field once we see Brownie's in trouble, and he tells us after the fact that when his head, because I was like, is he knocked out? Like, Brownie's not moving. He's just like standing there getting uppercutted by this huge Polynesian dude. And Brownie told us later, he was uppercutting, like some of them were getting through, most of them were hitting my forearm, but I just kept saying, my friends are coming, my friends are coming, my friends are coming, my friends are coming. And sure enough, me and Chad like tackled this guy and ripped him off, and it was like turned into this big brawl. It was really fun. But I remember after that, Brownie, just in terms of like my original question, we went back to the apartment, and you were in the mirror and you had this big cut on your eye and like blood coming down your face, and we like got you a drink, like a Red Bull or something, and we were all kind of doing like a post-fight analysis, and it was a really retrospective moment for all of us in that apartment, like our entire friend group, and we had a few of those moments. The big guy that you clocked in our parking lot, like we always had kind of like this post-game analysis of like what happened, what could we have done better, like what could have gone wrong. And it really, like, I do think there's some truth to that. Like, you learn a lot about yourself by being in a physical altercation. It's so extreme and it's so intense, and you don't know the other person can have a gun for all you know. Like, there's so much risk, and you don't know their skill level. You don't know if they know how to fight. They don't know if you know how to fight. Like, it's just, there is so much you learn about getting in fights. And Tyler Durden was onto something. The writers of the show, Chuck Palahniuk, the author of the book, was onto something with the psychology behind fights. I just find that so fascinating. Callum, what were you going to say?
So, do you know? I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with how the author got the idea on writing the book, but he was camping at like a beach or something like that, and there was a bunch of rowdy campers next to him, that were partying all night and noisy, and all he wanted to do is camp out by the ocean and hear the waves. And then I might be missing stuff, but I think he like in his head was going through what I wish I could just go over there and do to these youngins that are partying it up on the beach. But with my personal, I had a best friend growing up. His name, calling you out because you're going to watch this. His name was Stuart McIntosh. My best friend growing up. Now, Stuart McIntosh had never been in a fight, but I'd been in fights, and then we'd spoken about it, and then he'd be like, "Oh, if it was me, I'd have done this. If it was me, I'd have done this." You know those types of people where they say, "Oh, if I ever got in a fight, I would give him the 1-2 bamboo, and it'd be good night." Calm down, So we went to a football game, and there was a bunch of us. We took up we take the train to the football game, carriage full of us. We're all Rangers fans, and there's us boys, and then there was a bunch of girls there as well. So it was a good mixture of people. And then the opposing team's fans were in the carriage, one below us, and a few of us had clocked it. So being guys, it's kind of like how guys will tactfully, just without even thinking sometimes, will tactfully sit in a certain location in a restaurant or whatever. So a few of us guys tactfully kind of like shuffled down to the other end of the carriage where the opposing team's fans are, just in case anything popped off. So then the train stops at the stop where these opposing fans would get out. They get out, but instead of leaving, they get on our carriage, they open the doors, they rush in, and they just start leathering whoever they could get their hands on. And my friend, Stuart McIntosh, jumped over the seats to get away from the fight. And I never spoke to him again after it. Never spoke to him, because it's so and now I don't let anybody like this. This is so I'm so I don't let it slide at all. Whenever I meet someone and they're talking about fights and they say, "Oh, I would do this and that," I always say, "Have you ever been in a fight?" And if the answer is no, then I say, "How much can you really know about yourself if you've never been in a fight? You don't know what you would do in that situation." I think, I said this to my little brother a lot growing up, but I said, I think you'd be the person that would crumble, that would fall into the corner of the room and weep and pee yourself, hoping that someone else would do the dirty work for you. It's true. You can't know much about yourself unless you've been in a fight.
Was that wee little Lewis? You told that too.
Wee little Lewis. I still don't think he's been in a fight. You know what? I'm going back home for my brother's wedding, my brother Jordan's wedding. I'm going to get all of us boys in a fight. We're going to go out a night out in the that's what I used. Me and my buddies. But the first fight, the first proper, one of the first fights I ever got in was this boy that after we had the fight, we became good friends. And then he was in my close friend group. Every weekend when we got old enough to start liking girls and going out nights out on the town, every weekend we used to say, "Right, boys, are we going out looking for women? Or are we going out looking for a fight?" And if we decided to go out looking for a woman and we never got women, we'd get in a fight every single weekend. It was either women or a fight. Both if we were lucky.
Dude, I love that, man. I should have qualified my statement earlier. Like, Brownie's the person I know that's been in most physical altercations, but Callum, just because I wasn't there to witness them, I feel like you're a contender as well. You have so many fight stories from the old days in Scotland. You've been freaking stabbed, for crying out loud, and we can get into that if you want to. So yeah, awesome. Twice, Drew? Callum's been stabbed twice? Holy smokes. Anyway, we'll have to hear that story. You're going to show us a... Where did you get stabbed?
He did get stabbed in the buttocks, just like Forrest Gump.
One in the left buttocks, but my wife thinks it's a cute little dimple now, so that works out well. And the other one is a big slash down the leg. So I've got...
Oh, dude, win-win. You get a cool story and a cute little butt dimple as a result. Yeah, it's amazing. Alan, sorry, you had your hand raised. What were you going to say?
I was actually just engrossed in Callum's story. But the author, the idea for the book, so he did get in a fight on the beach and he got beat up pretty bad, right? And his face got all messed up. And then he went to work the next day and nobody wanted to comment on it. And nobody even asked him like what had happened. And so the social observation is what's from that interaction is what prompted him to write the book, because he's like, people are so uncomfortable with the world, with anything that doesn't fall in line with their worldview, that they will go out of their way to not talk about it. And so the part of the purpose of the book is to put, and the film is to put people into situations that are uncomfortable, to force them to have like actual genuine experiences, like getting in a fight, for example. That's what I was going to say on the origins of the book. But the reason I found that out was because we've talked about in our other chats where we asking the question, like, are there movies that are better than the books? Because for the most part, the book is always better than the movie, and in very rare instances, the inverse is true. And even the author, when he watched this movie, he's like, the movie's better than my book. And anyway, that's the reason I looked into it, because I heard that he had said that, and then just got me looking into the 7 clicks to Jesus kind of thing. I just dig a little bit deeper into finding out like the origins of the story.
Yeah, I might be the only person here that's read the book. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I definitely second that observation. I remember when I read the book, I'd seen the movie 100 times, but I read the book because I was like, I should know the source material. And if the book's better than the movie, holy smokes, hold on to your butts. And I read the book, and some people might disagree with this who read the book, but I thought, and maybe it's because of my preconceived expectations, but it was pretty much beat for beat the exact same as the movie, but the movie added more, and it wasn't a bad more. It was like more substance to, like more Tyler Durden philosophy, for example. There's just more of him in the movie, which is like anytime Brad Pitt's on the screen, you are just absolutely captured as an audience member. Justin, go ahead.
All right. So being a novice at this, I was thinking when he's given the speech about our Great Depression is our lives, and he said, I want you to go out and start a fight and lose. And the scene with the priest and the hose, like, just had me laughing hysterically because he gets the priest to fight him, and then you see the priest later on in the basement. So I thought that was.
And Justin, the funny trivia on that is you see the camera shake, and the cameraman starts laughing at that same moment that he hoses down the priest. So it's one of those little fun trivias.
That is cool. I didn't know that. That's awesome. And Justin, that is so funny. I had my phone out and I was getting ready to ask you a question about that exact. We're in sync. I was gonna say all of us are white collar workers, I think, in this group for the most. I mean, Alan, that's like as white collar as the military gets. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just trying to make this applicable, because when I hear this quote, and this is one that me and Brownie send to each other all the time on Instagram, and it's the one that Justin just referenced. I just want to hear, like, I want to hear, Drew, your commentary. Like, what does this quote do to you when you hear it? Because a flood of testosterone-filled emotions fill me when I hear it. But the quote is, and I'm going to edit this because our mother is going to be listening to this. Man, I see in Fight Club the strongest and smartest men who've ever lived. I see all this potential. I see squandering, and I see it squandering. An entire generation pumping gas, waiting tables, slaves with white collars. Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy we don't need. We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no great war, no great depression. Our great war is a spiritual war. Our great depression is our lives. We've all been raised on television to believe that one day we'd all be millionaires and movie gods and rock stars, but we won't. And we're slowly learning that fact, and we're very, very pissed off. That is such a well-written monologue, and it's so applicable to probably 95% of American men who have all this testosterone and nowhere to channel it. Drew, what does that quote do? What not the quote, but the scene? What is that scene? I mean, they're in the basement of Lou's, and he's kind of pacing back. He's in the Fight Club, and he's got the attention of all those men who like he's speaking to, and it's hitting them to the core. What does that do to you as an audience member? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it does two things. One, it makes me feel like I'm useless because I'm not in that basement with them, and like as much as I want to believe it, I'm not believe that I'm down there. I'm like, I'm just not cool enough. I'm not part of that Fight Club, but I want to be. And then that's the second part is even though this movie, like, I guess I imagine it as people who don't know what brotherhood is, like they don't have that kind of group around them. They watch this movie and they like strive for that. And like us being young kids all growing up and like already having that, it was almost nostalgic watching it where, I mean, we're not that articulate or eloquent when we say things, but like watching it just brings me back to, I just need 20 good guys in my life. That's all I need. I need 20 good guys like that we can just riff off each other. And I know I have their back and they have my back. And like, that's what I need. But the quote itself, I mean, obviously it gets you going, but what hits harder for me watching that scene is like the brotherhood, the unity. And then we see how it progresses as you watch the movie, but like all finding one common goal or even one common enemy, which is the modern world, and us fighting our own inner. My kids are upstairs. Like that's something to strive for, and that's something to be proud of, and that's something that like is hard to find with a sound group of men. And man, does it make me want to. It motivates me, I think, and I think it probably hits similar tones with everyone, is what I would imagine.
I remember a few years ago, my brothers might remember this because I texted you in the group. We were all texting like a nostalgic, I don't know, Alan bought like a box set of DuckTales or something like that. I don't remember. It was something, and it spurred a conversation of like, and I didn't have kids at the time, and you guys all had kids, and I was just like, what is your like temperature check on cartoons? Because I remember when I grew up, like when I was a kid, cartoons were a very certain way. And then when I was a teenager, so when like Drew and Zane, my little brothers, were like in that kid phase, I noticed this distinctive shift in cartoons where I grew up in the late 80s and 90s where it was like He-Man and Thundercats and G.I. Joe and X-Men and Spider-Man. Like they were heroes who were like defeating bad guys by beating them up and like physical confrontations, and like G.I. Joe, you know, it was like, and knowing is half the battle. And there's always a lesson at the end, because the shows were so violent that like He-Man, Masters of the Universe, for example, only got green lit if they promised to have a little positive message at the end of every episode, you know. And so He-Man stares at the camera and says like, you know, you need to be a good citizen and eat your vitamins or whatever. And G.I. Joe, you know, at the end of every episode would be like, and knowing's half the battle. Like there was always a lesson, but they were very combative cartoons that I grew up watching. And then in the like late 90s, early 2000s, all of a sudden you get Recess, you get Pepper Ann, you get Rugrats. All of a sudden there was like this shift of like funny, like instead of going from like action-packed freedom fighter heroes, all of a sudden the American narrative shifted to like this, oh, we want all of our kids to be comedians all of a sudden, like very pacifist, very gentle comedians. And I remember it bothered me, and I didn't even have kids, but I was like, why are we trying to neuter our society? And it's only gotten worse since, you know? So anyway, just what Drew was talking about that brotherhood, about the, like the social commentary of like, and like what I mentioned before about, you know, just because society has changed and we've gotten, gentler as a society doesn't mean that our testosterone has decreased. And if there's nowhere for that testosterone to be channeled, then where does it go? And I think Fight Club is a great commentary on kind of that social neutering that men have experienced. And Chuck Palahniuk talks about that as well, but like the social commentary of men and testosterone and how that kind of fits in. Chase, we used to go over to Newman's house and just destroy things. When I see that scene on Fight Club where he first moves into the soap house, into the big mansion that's leaky and everything, and he says things like, after the first month, I didn't miss watching television. And you see him and Tyler Durden like hitting stuff with golf clubs, and he's like, we were half a mile from any civilization, and they were like, and then there's other scenes where they're like bashing in the cars with baseball bats. And there's something, again, I would never, like, as a adult that wants a well-functioning society, I would never promote this, but there's a part of me that, like, when I see those scenes, I think about us going to the Newman's house as kids, where we would just be like making napalm and blowing things up and busting open fireworks so we could get to the black powder and like make weapons, and we were just constantly like destroying things. And there's something like deep rooted in the heart of most boys, especially like adolescent boys, where like destruction's fun. I mean, we see those videos on Instagram, people pushing off boulders off cliffs. Like, it's always boys pushing boulders, watching the explosion. What is that, Chase? What is it that and maybe speak on how the movie taps into whatever that is, how David Fincher was able to really like kind of illustrate in a way that is so relatable to so many people. What is that? What is that, Chase?
Yeah, I think it's and I don't know if this is accurate, but I feel like it's like testosterone manifesting itself in boys. Right. And like, so I look at my kids right now, my older two boys, they're taking stuff apart, right? I mean, they're pretty destructive, but it's a lot of taking stuff apart to see how it works. And right, I'll give them, I had a busted pair of like headphones. So I gave it to Bruce. I'm like, here, Bruce, like, have this. First thing he does, takes it apart. It's unusable now, but he just wanted to take it apart and see how it works. And yeah, I think boys just want like we figure out how the world works by interacting with it in a very physical way. And so, if I won't say with safe boundaries, because it was chaos and my life was in peril many a times over at the Newman's house. But it was right. We blew so much stuff up. I think one of the most dangerous things is when our cousin Ricky, right, back when he was Ricky, gave us, like, me and Drew, a anarchist cookbook on a set of cassette tapes, and we just print stuff off and go over to the Newmans and try and make it. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Like me and Jake tried to make a replicant C4 and that was a bust. But boy, we almost blew up his kitchen making it. It was fantastic. But yeah, it's just boys wanting to blow stuff up, and you see that like giddy boyness as they're doing stuff, right? Like so when you look at some of their homework assignments where they switch the grate of the car tire spikes, and then they're just setting off airbags, like totaling cars is what it was. Right, like you can see their enjoyment, and then they're kind of laughing as they blow the airbags on the Volkswagen Bug, and then as that it was like limousine goes over the tire spikes and it explodes the tires, and they kind of run off laughing, giggling to each other, and it's like that's just like their 12, 14-year-old boy self manifesting itself through their 30-year-old body. And they just have more capability, more know-how, like they know how to be violent and destructive. And that's really what 12-year-olds want to do. They want to blow stuff up and take stuff apart because that's how they figure out how the world works. At least that's been my perspective with, my boys, which is slightly different than like Alora Ooze, right? More inquisitive. I don't know, but less destructive.
Chase, that reminds me, something that I wanted to talk about this evening was this time watching it around, and maybe I'm late to the game, but let me know what you guys think. Did you notice this time? I noticed it. That speaking of like kind of that young mentality that you just want to be destructive and you're just a kid and you just want to break things, but putting that mindset into an adult is kind of how I felt Tyler Durden was. And this time when I was watching, there were so many callbacks to adolescence. Like he said, when Tyler and the woman, oh my gosh, I know the name. Just tell me though. Marla, thank you. When he was like, I never saw him in the same room together, and then she would come up and she's like, well, tell Tyler I say bye, and he's like, oh, just get out of here, like, and then he's like, the narration says, it's like I'm back in 6th grade passing notes again. And then later in the movie, when Tyler and Edward Norton are talking and like having similar experiences with their father, he said, I don't know, once he walked out when I was 6 years old. And then Marla saying, I haven't been screwed like that since grade school. So like all of these themes keep pushing it back into like this weird adolescence mindset. And I'd never noticed that before until I watched it this time, where I was like, wow, it just and then even in the scene that we were just talking about, where with Tyler Durden's monologue, he references like, we have nothing left to fight for. We are the Great Depression. Like our lives are the Great Depression. Like he's still bringing it back to like an adolescence type of mindset. And I don't know if you guys have any insights on that, but if you do, I want to know, because I watched that this time and I was like, that was the first time I noticed that. And I wonder if there's any meaning behind it that you guys know, because other than just kind of the face value of it.
Drew, you and I are the same exact person. I'm convinced of that more and more each passing year, because that's literally one of the biggest takeaways from this time watching it was I noticed Tyler Durden laughing at stuff that 15-year-old me laughed at. Again, rudimentary, something just granular about that. And I see that in Tyler Durden. This last time watching it, I saw that in Tyler Durden. Like he just laughs so hard at just destruction. And I was like, that's me as a teenager. And again, it's just tapping into this testosterone that and Alan, I wanted to ask you, just because my political leanings are like anarcho-capitalism. Like I take things to the extreme. When Tyler Durden is on the scene and I'm watching the Fight Club, monologues, I'm like, oh, this is for real. Like I'm ready to like pick up a sword and go to war for these kinds of philosophies. Like they're so visceral and real to me. And before I was married, I even considered buying like a huge rundown house that nobody cared about anymore, that leaked and barely had electricity. And I just stacked the walls with magazines and wouldn't have TV. Like I literally like thought of it. And to Drew's point about, Tyler Durden, he's riding a bike in his bathrobe. He's doing nunchucks. Like he's just a man child. And I'm like, a part of me wanted that. I'm like, I don't have a wife. I don't have kids. I kind of just wanted, and I was making good money in like 2018, 2019. When I thought about this, I'm like, I could just buy like a big house and just be Tyler Durden. I don't need a lot. I don't need material. The things that I own end up owning me. I don't need that in my life. I was like talking myself into this, and I never.
So
never
yeah, give me your book collection, because that's how you feel. Give me your book collection.
No, and that's what I was gonna line the walls with. Would be my books. I wanted to be like the narrator, be like, Jack's colon cancer or whatever. I wanted to like immerse myself in reading and playful, and I wanted to be like the narrator, not miss television after the first month, and just be like entertaining myself and living a more full life. But Alan, the reason I wanted to point this towards you is you are not as extreme as I am. I want to know what you feel when you hear these. Is it just like pure entertainment when you see it, or does it tickle something in your head too, where you're like, I want to instill some of these principles, maybe not as extreme, but I want to instill some of these principles into my kids, or it got you to think a different way about like the orthodox way of, you know, normal people perceiving how life should work? Like, what do these scenes do to you, Alan? Because I feel like you are kind of my barometer for like a more level-headed, normal, like based in reality kind of mentality. What would you say this movie does to you philosophically?
That's a loaded question. And from so the movie itself is a dichotomy, right? Because boy, I'm having a hard time like talking about the actual spoilers of this movie. like I don't want to say it, but we're talking about it. That's okay. Spoilers. The fact that the narrator and Tyler Durden are the same person, and that dichotomy between the two of them throughout the movie as a same person is just the conflict that we all have within us. That's how I kind of view it, right? So the narrator is supposed to be the level-headed one that you know, he starts the movie off with the crap, I just brain farted. What's the home shopping magazine?
IKEA?
IKEA. Yeah. Like having the IKEA house and all that kind of stuff, right? Like he had his life, you know, completely set up, and then Tyler Durden is the childhood component that's like kind of lashing out, like the carnal part of his literal subconscious that needs satisfaction. Probably one of my favorite parts of the movie is when is their human sacrifice. He's like, what are we doing here? Human sacrifice. He's like, wait, what? Is that a gun? Why do you have a gun? Right? And they take the Asian clerk out back, and then he threatens him with his life, says all the things that he's going to say. And then he's like, I know your address. I'm going to check up on you again. And if you're not in 6 weeks, and if you're not 6 weeks closer to having your veterinarian degree, then I'm going to kill you. Your life's going to end. And then he says, run. And he runs. And then the narrator's like, what the heck was what was the point of that? You know, or whatever he says. And, I'm going to butcher the quote, but should have written it down. Because Tyler Durden says something along the lines of, tomorrow, whatever the guy's name is going to wake up and he's going to have the best day of his life. The breakfast that he eats tomorrow or whatever is going to taste sweeter to him than you and I have ever experienced in our lives. And I think that that element of just genuinely living life is perfectly like something that we should like strive for. And so and I mean, I know a whole lot of the movie is about that. It's about trying to from Tyler Durden's perspective, it's, you know, it not so much from like legitimately, like, I guess you could say that, you know, the movie, like mom being political, saying that, yeah, the movie's about, it's like a weird political agenda to like bring down the government. No, that wasn't it, right? Like the point that Tyler Durden was trying to make is give people genuine lived experiences instead of just being controlled by the world that they've succumbed to. And there is a comfort in that, and there is something that's nice about that. One of the best things about being an adult was that I can go buy the action figures that I never, you know, that my dad never let me buy when I was a kid and had the money to buy 4 Ninja Turtles, and he only let me buy 2, you know, kind of thing. Yeah, Bo knows. He was there. And so there is that element of being adult that I'm like, I can do what I want because I'm the grown up now, and that satisfies a little bit of that teenager angst that I felt when I was younger. I said a lot. I don't know if I answered your question very well.
Really quick before we get too far away from this, Bo, I do want to bring up Chateau d'If, if you do remember. So for those who don't know about this, Bo, in our college days, I know he is talking about going out and buying that rickety old house. Well, first year of knowing Bo, I found out that him and a buddy of ours, Tyler, went out into the forest up a canyon in Utah, and they built a fort. Grown men went out and built a fort. and they said, we are done with society. We are done paying rent, and we are going to show it to the man, and we're not going to pay rent, and we're going to live out in the forest. We're going to go to Vasa, and that's where we'll take our showers, and then we'll just go right to work, and then it's back to the forest. That was the first year of meeting Bo. And Bo, did you want to share how that went?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And it just legitimizes what I was saying. I really do internalize these things, and I am a very extreme person because, yeah, me and Tyler Miskin, not Tyler Durden, in case any of you guys were wondering. There is just one of me in here. But yeah, me and Tyler Miskin, we were just so tired of paying rent, and we were so poor. We built an entire fort in Rock Canyon Park in Provo, Utah, and we were planning to live there. He bailed. I was down. He was the one that went to Arizona to visit his family, and he never came back. So I had to find him. I wasn't about to live in the woods out by myself. As a matter of fact, the first night was my last night. I was like, all right, Tyler, you're not going to do this. I'll do it. And I went up there. I laid in my sleeping bag, and boy, I tell you what, in the middle of the night when you're in the forest and you start hearing twigs cracking and footsteps a few feet away from you, like I was like, nope,
Goat man coming.
I need a friend. And so I just packed up all my stuff. It was like 11 p.m. and I went to Brownie's apartment, actually, and he was gracious. Him and his roommates were out of town, but they were gracious enough to let me sleep on their couch until I found an apartment. But yeah, so yeah, thank you, Brownie. I wasn't even thinking about that. I guess I've always been this way. Callum, I have a question for you. You live in the Pacific Northwest. I don't want to get too political here, but I've listened to a lot of podcasts on Fight Club. And what's so interesting is that there is this distinctive difference between Hollywood, like critics, Hollywood moviegoers, people who live in LA and who are like engrossed in the Hollywood scene. When they talk about Fight Club, they talk about as though it's satire. They say, Tyler Durden, he's against consumerism, but he's also like wearing designer clothes, and he's also like really well made up, and so he's a walking contradiction. So this movie was made by David Fincher, like tongue in cheek, and they have this spin. It's so interesting. It's like these low testosterone soy boys just can't wrap their minds around the idea that anybody would take this movie's philosophy seriously. And then I listened to podcasts from people from like the Midwest, like down home, down to earth, people who are among actual normal people, and they have discussions like we're having right now. How do you perceive, I guess my question to you, Callum, is very similar to my question to Alan, and that's how do you internalize the philosophy of the movie? Because I know that you are in Washington, which is a very liberal state, and I imagine that most people you're rubbing shoulders with, whether you're aware of it or not, would see Fight Club and be like, oh yeah, they were just joking. Oh yeah, they were actually like making fun of those philosophies because it's a satirical movie. It's not a serious movie. And this is the commentary I hear over and over and over again from Hollywood people who are trying to dissect this movie, who just can't wrap their minds around the idea of males actually being drawn to violence, actually finding catharsis through violence. What's your take in terms of you've been in a lot of pain. You've been stabbed twice. We just found out. Give us your rundown of Tyler Durden's philosophy, the philosophy of Fight Club, and the legitimacy of it that you see in your life in terms of like the positive benefits of getting hurt, being active, being proactive, getting your knees scuffed, getting hit. Just what does that do mentally to your mind, to your soul, to your body? What does it do?
Well, first I want to talk. I'll answer your question and talk about the Pacific Northwest first. I looked at some reviews. Obviously, it's an older movie. I looked at some reviews for the movie, and some of the reviews were pretty recent, like on Rotten Tomatoes or something like that, And a lot of the reviews that gave it like a Rotten Tomato was saying that it's glorifying toxic masculinity and blah blah blah, and that's what I would suspect that people here in the Pacific Northwest, I don't think they would look at it and think it's satire. I think they would look at it and be like, it's downplaying mental illness, and it's not sensitive around mental illness, and it deals with it promotes dealing with mental health problems in the wrong way, in a toxic way, which is a masculine way of looking at it, which would just bring utter destruction and chaos to I think that's how they would look at it. But what's interesting is the beginning. So when the narrator meets Tyler and they have that interaction on the airplane, and it wasn't anything like really significant that happened. It was just basic conversation. And when I watched that, it had an impact on me. On like, first impressions are a big deal, because when he was thinking, what am I going to do now that my apartment's blown up, he is thinking, and he's like, I'm going to call Tyler. And now he'd only just had the first impression of Tyler Durden, you know. So now when I'm here and I'm in a place where people have a different mindset to me, I think to myself, I want to leave the first impression. I want to leave the first impression. It makes people think, am I in a funk? Am I in a big echo chamber that's just like sculpted me to think and act in a certain way? Because like in the movie, it's all about consumerism and things like that. But nowadays, like, it's all about political philosophies and ideologies and whatnot. And maybe that would be like a cultural shift in how it was portrayed then to maybe how it could be portrayed today. So like the other day, I was standing in line at the grocery store, and there was a guy standing behind me. He was like a middle-aged guy. You could tell that he just got off work. He was buying a box of chocolates that were in a love heart shape. So I just made conversation with him. But I try to be, I don't want to talk about the weather when I'm making conversation with someone. I want to be specific. So I spoke to him about his chocolates that he was buying, must have been buying for a significant other. And then I pointed to a magazine behind me, and on the headline, the front cover of the magazine, it was how Donald Trump is in a sexless marriage. And I pointed it to him and I says, what do you think about this? Now, this is the first time we were in the line at the grocery store. And he just sort of laughs. And I'm like, we're in an election year, and these are the hard-hitting questions that these journalists are asking a possible presidential candidate is, how's your sex life in your marriage? I'm like, don't you think that's like it boggles my mind? Don't you think that's insane? And he's like, that is insane, yeah. And you can tell that this guy was just he was just in the rut of his day, got off work, goes to the grocery store, picks up a few things for dinner, goes home. And I wanted to try and leave that little impression on like, think outside of the box. Like, what world are we living in right now? We're living in a world where we're being fed narratives. Doesn't matter where we're getting them from. It seems like if you go turn on Fox News, you'll get a narrative. If you turn on CNN, you'll get a narrative. They tell us about climate change and how many times we should be flying. They'll tell you about what car you need to drive. Yeah, you shouldn't be driving a gas guzzler. They'll tell you that you need to turn off your heating at a certain time because you're using too many emissions. They'll tell you that working out is a sign of toxic masculinity. Like, they'll just try and mold you into this pawn that is unwilling and unprepared to fight against the man or the narrative or whatever it is, So the way that affects the whole philosophy affects my life is I feel as though and we all talk often not only about movies but about other stuff, politics and current events and whatnot. And I feel as though we all have a good look and are able to evaluate different current events in a way that is not typical, not in a way that your typical person will just hear the news or hear what their brother thinks or their mother thinks or whoever it is, and will just go with the flow. So now I'm like, okay, I want to be able to be that gate. I want to be the Tyler Durden for someone to ask the question that will make them think and show them another door, you know. So like, and that's fun living here in the Pacific Northwest, because I'll wear my Gadsden flag T-shirt to the gym, and I'll have people looking at me, and then I'll start up a conversation with started up so many. I've told you guys about one, but it started up some other ones as well since then, and it's just been great to be like, I want to be deliberate, I want to be articulate, and I want to be able to ask a question that will open the mind possibly of someone who is living in a system and in a rut, and maybe will help them think outside the box, you know.
I hate to break it to you, Callum, but you're not getting the rough brunt of what you should be getting simply because of your accent. The moment people realize you are not American, they give you a pass. Just so you know.
That's a little bit of mystery, though, doesn't it?
It's
Convincing to. There's actually a study done. Apparently, the Glaswegian accent is the most trusting accent.
No kidding.
Apparently, the study was done in Glasgow by a Glaswegian, but
That's a bald-faced lie.
Yeah, explain the 2 stabbings then.
you don't
Yeah.
trust me. What, you don't trust me?
As long as I can see both of your hands and we're a good distance away.
Hey, Bo, I wanted to ask you a question before it slips my mind. Well, actually, first, show of hands, who has read the book? I have not.
Oh, you did, Callum? I didn't know that. Oh, cool.
Yeah. So just as a little, this was actually a big thing. I wasn't very good in school. I wasn't a good student or anything like that. But in English class, one of the homework assignments was to write like a book report, and we got to choose whatever book we wanted. And then I was trying to be rebellious in some sort of way or whatever, you know, and my brothers were a big influence on me. And we'd watched Fight Club previous to that, and they'd read the book. So I was like, I'm going to do my book report on Fight Club. And then my teacher hated it. But yeah. So I read the book and wrote a report on it.
Sweet. Well, what I wanted to ask then for you two is, what do you see of David Fincher's playing in the movie versus what were on pages? Because like we all have, I mean, if we want low-hanging fruit, the griminess of the city. I mean, we've seen that in every one of his films, and we've talked about it in every one of his films. But in this one, something that he did different was he broke that fourth wall, and he did it in a really weird way when the whole movie wasn't breaking the fourth wall, and then he just kind of abruptly made the narrator turn to the camera, and then all of a sudden we were having a conversation with him. So now we are in his head with him and Tyler, and that was the maybe the only significant time in my head when I was watching and I was like, oh, I don't feel like it's a David Fincher movie anymore. I'm like, this, like the griminess is still there, but this has changed it. And now it's the whole dynamic of the movie has switched now. And I don't know how much more of the breaking the fourth wall was in the book versus the movie, but like, what do you guys see in the movie that makes it a David Fincher movie rather than just kind of a page for page adaptation of the book?
That's a great question. I think that if David Fincher was an author, he would be Chuck Palahniuk. It's so strange to me that the book came out before the movie because, and again, this was my biased perspective, having seen the movie many times before reading the book. So I was inserting Brad Pitt whenever the page said Tyler Durden. Like, it wasn't my imagination; it was the movie that I was reading about. And it was so close to the movie. I remember being a little disappointed in the book that they didn't flesh out Tyler Durden as much. He didn't have these long monologues, like these big philosophical, impactful speeches. It was almost like he was more just an agent of chaos that would like, and again, it's been a few years since I've read the book, so I don't remember specifically. I just remember my initial impression was, oh, I want more Tyler Durden, and the book isn't giving it to me. It's almost like David Fincher read the book and was like, this is the most interesting part of the book, and I'm going to make this the central focal point of the movie. We're going to give more meat to Tyler Durden. We're going to give him like center stage. It's going to be the most charismatic actor of our time, you know, and the most beautiful actor of our time. Brad Pitt, just like in peak physical form, and he's so articulate. And I feel like David Fincher just took this blueprint and perfectly expanded it into what we get in the movie. Like there's not a better fit in terms of a screenplay, in terms of a story, in terms of an idea for David Fincher with his style than Chuck Palahniuk's book, Fight Club. Anything you'd like to add, Callum, before we go to Chase?
No, that was a good cover.
Go for it, Chase.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Chase.
so I like, and the way you talk about this, and right, and it kind of comes back to something we've discussed a lot in our chats is like, when you have a really good story, why do you deviate from that story? And right, we've talked that probably one of the best examples of that is Watchmen by Zack Snyder, where he just took the graphic novel and frame for frame recreated the graphic novel. And people were like, well, it's just the same thing. He goes, yeah, but it's a different medium. You see it differently. You give life to these characters, right, etc. And so you have this amazing blueprint of, right, and even before the movie, it was renowned as one of the greatest graphic novels that's out there. And so, like, you have a blueprint, you have an excellent story that everybody loves, just give life to it. That's all you need to do. Stop trying to change it. Don't add your artistic flair. Don't cut out because you don't like, with Watchmen, you could make the case of like Dr. Manhattan's origin story. That's kind of a lull part of the movie. So cut that out. We don't need that. But Zack Snyder said, no, I don't care. We are going to go step by step through the story because the story works. And the way you've described Fight Club, it's kind of the same thing where David Fincher goes, this is a great story. This is a great book. Why do I need to change it? Right. And he fleshed out Tyler Durden a little bit more, but why change something that is fantastic? Because when you have something that's such high caliber, like grade A material, any change you make, you have a 95% chance you're going to just drop it to B or C level category, rather than just take the story, tell the story, give life to it, and you keep it an A level story. So anyways, right. I mean, this is one of those conversations we've had. And as you've said, right, like, this is one of those examples where the movie is as good, if not better than the book. And again, they're far and few between, but the times that it works, it's where the director takes the book and goes, I'm just giving life to it. I'm not going to change it. Why should I change it?
And Alan Moore still hated Watchmen, the movie. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I don't get that, right? I don't think Alan Moore likes movies. I think that's his thing.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I would add is the ending did change. There was a change in the ending between the book and the movie. Like in the book, if I remember right, like he wakes up in like a mental hospital or something like that, which is maybe a bold move to change the ending, but I think the author, what was his name again? The author,
Chuck Palahniuk. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but yeah,
I'm pretty sure that not only did he admit that the movie was better than the book, but I think he also said that there was key factors within the movie that they picked up on, and they used as a theme throughout the movie that he only referenced in the book, and he also admitted that he thought that the ending was better in the movie than what he wrote in the book.
There's a one thing I wanted to mention. I heard Chuck Palahniuk. He's been on the Rogan podcast a few times, and he's talked about Fight Club, and he talked about like the impact that it had. Like, there was a Fight Club that I didn't know this until I listened to the podcast, but in Provo, Utah, there was like an underground Fight Club full of like BYU students when the movie came out, who were like boxing. And there's film, you can look it up on YouTube. There's like videos of like these new kids just duking it out in somebody's basement. Like, And I thought, and anyway, it's cool that like that was on Chuck's radar as the author of the book, and he's realizing the impact that it has, and he kind of deconstructs it similar to how we've been, where he's like, on the one hand, you can look at it as satire and it is super extreme and it's meant to be entertaining, but on the other hand, there's like deep-seated psychology that I wanted to explore and really dig into and weave throughout the story, and use the story as kind of a scaffolding to address some of these issues that he was observing. And again, I think the movie did it better than the book was great, but the movie did it even better. And I would just say, Callum, I forgot to mention when you said that you were reading reviews and you think people in your state would probably say that it's a depiction of, toxic masculinity, and they probably wouldn't like the movie because of all, X, Y, and Z reasons. What's interesting when you were saying that, I was like, the podcasts I listened to of like these Hollywood analysts, what was funny was it's almost like they couldn't allow themselves to like the movie because of the toxic masculinity and the message, but they also couldn't deny how great of a movie it was. And that's why they lean on the crutch of, oh, it's all satire. Oh, he didn't mean any of this. Oh, it's all said tongue in cheek. That way they can escape like being labeled as like proponents of toxic masculinity, while also acknowledging that David Fincher made a freaking masterpiece with this movie. I have a question for Justin and Brownie. Because both of you guys, Justin, first time I met you was with Justin Cooper. I think I was 10, you were 12, and we dropped off at your house for some reason. I don't know if you remember this, but we were playing like army in the yard with sticks, pretending that they were guns or whatever. That was my first interaction with you. I didn't see you. I saw you sporadically, but not consistently until I was again a teenager, 15 or 16 years old. And it was the summer that I met the Brooks brothers, and we were doing what we called Saturday Night Slam Session, where every Saturday night we would get together, our friend group would get together, and we would either meet in my basement in Flagstaff. We're all in Flagstaff, but we'd either meet in my basement, my parents' basement, and throw on some boxing gloves and just go to town, or we'd go to Andrew Summers' house and we'd be on the trampoline and we'd fight, and we called what we called the gauntlet, where one person would be on the tramp and then like the 8 other dudes would just be surrounded, and it'd be one at a time for 2 minutes. And the person who was going through the gauntlet would stay on the tramp, and then we just rotate out people. And by the time you get to like the 6th or 7th person, you're just exhausted, you're drenched in sweat, your hands are hanging, you're throwing haymakers because you don't have good form anymore. Justin was a part of that. Like, he would show up every now and then. And anyway, so I know, Justin, like, you've been hit. You were a martial artist when you were a kid, sort of, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I remember you had a bow staff and a gi. I assumed you were into some sort of martial arts, and you would fight, and we'd all get hit. We'd have like the sparring gloves, and we were on the trampoline. We'd all be punching each other, and we'd be getting hit. Brownie, obviously, I've already said my piece on you. I know that you've been hit. That scene, the chemical burn scene, when the narrator keeps trying to escape to his happy place. He tries to meditate away from the pain, and Tyler Durden keeps bringing him back to the pain, and he says, lean into it, embrace it, like this is like your liberation. And eventually the narrator, like, he sees the scar on Tyler's hand, and then he's given strength from that, and he leans into the pain as a source of healing light. What would you guys say, because I know you're both acquainted with physical pain, how would you argue that pain is healthy? Because somebody like my mother or my wife don't understand that. Like, the idea that physical pain could somehow be healthy for an individual, that does not resonate with a lot of people. But I know both of you guys have been hurt, and I know both of you guys leaned into the pain while you were getting hurt. What would you say are the health benefits of physical pain? We'll go with you first, Justin.
Part of it is how much you can take, and another part is our physical bodies are meant to break down and get stronger and form again. Like, that's how muscles are increased. You break them down and you build them up. I think it's same thing with emotional baggage and stuff. If you embrace the pain, not only are you forcing yourself to live through something traumatic, you're going to remember it, but the fortitude of anything in this life is worth sacrificing something. And sometimes that's most of the time that's comfort. And you see all these, we call them milk toast snowflakes, melt at the one ray of sunshine, because we're not asked to do anything hard. You're not asked to get a shovel and dig a hole anymore. It's just, just call a repairman. Like, nobody fixes anything. Nobody works on cars anymore. I mean, I'm at that point now where cars are just so, you have to go to school now to know them. But I mean, I hated working on cars because I was scrawny, and that's why my dad wanted me in there. But I didn't have the muscle strength to move these wrenches. And then you'd bang up against something really hot because you just ran the engine, but you could still smell the smells. You can feel that burns on your hand even now, or arms right now, and all those memories now are fond memories. They're not, oh my gosh, I can't. They're like, yeah, I did that. I did something. When you have calluses on your hands or scars, you're like, I did something. I accomplished something today. You can't do that without, as he says, breaking a few eggs.
Well, I love that. That line from Brad Pitt that I read earlier, where he's like, "You really want to die without any scars?" That's kind of to your point, Justin. Scars add character, and there is a threshold. Obviously, I wouldn't call jumping off a cliff and getting paralyzed from the neck down a good experience that you look back on fondly. But scraping.
And I also don't recommend chemical burns. That's a little extreme.
Agreed. Alan, what were you going to say before we get to Brownie?
I like this. I like the concept of leaning into pain, and I went to so one of the first trainings that I did in the Navy was SEER school, which is Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape, and it's a hell of an experience. And one of the things they tell us, like when you first get there, is like, we understand that you want to fight back, because most people don't join the military to sit on their thumbs, and so they're like, we understand that you're gonna be triggered. We're gonna hit that flight or fight response, and you're not gonna be able to run away, and you're gonna really want to fight, but you can't. And if you do, the training stops. You have to leave, then you can come back to do it again. And they gave us, some tips and tricks to kind of help curve that fight response. But the point of SEER school is to teach you where your breaking point is. You need to learn something about yourself to understand when it is that you're going to break. Because what they tell us is they're like, look, everybody's going to break under interrogation. Everybody will always break. You just need to find out where that point is for you. And I remember the moment where it was leaning into the pain for me. And it was because it's kind of fun. It's one of those experiences where you look back on it, it's like, that was pretty sweet. That was a fun experience. Maybe I'm alone in that. There are fewer people that don't think that way. Anyway, I had a good time because it felt like a giant game of hide and seek. It was kind of cool. But eventually you get captured. And I remember the point, the leaning into it point, which was after we'd been captured, and I didn't even do anything. It was really funny. We're all lined up. They're all yelling at us. They're accusing us of all kinds of things. And we're lined up, and then they start giving us these rules, these like really ridiculous rules. And they said, does anybody have a problem with this, or something along those lines? And there was a guy that was standing behind me, and he grabbed my arm and he threw it up, and he's like, this one has a problem with the rules. I was like, and this dude, he must have been like 7 foot tall and probably 300 pounds of pure muscle. And he squares up in front of me, and he just looks at me. I'm looking at him. And he's like, close your mouth. And I was like, this is the moment. Like, this is that moment where you have to lean into it or you're going to break. And so I clenched, I like set my jaw, And then he just railed on me. They're not allowed to hit you with a closed fist. But I'll tell you, I mean, we've all been in fights. You can do a lot of damage without a closed fist. And but that was the moment for me that was kind of like that like don't go to your happy place. And there is no happy place. And it was actually, sorry, now that I'm thinking about it, it kind of triggered another memory. When Bo and I were young, and dad got mad at us. Mom wasn't home. We kept goofing off, and dad had probably told us maybe a dozen times to shut up and go to bed. And then he finally came in, and we both threw the covers over our head, and he comes in and he thumps us, right? And he thumped me, then he thumped you, and then he turns out and walked out, and then we both just started laughing because we're like, I saw stars. Did you see stars? You remember that? That was a really unique experience. But in that moment, I guess I kind of did hit a happy place because he did that to me. And like, I don't remember how many times he actually hit me, but I legit saw stars, and I started giggling because it just reminded me of that moment. I was like, well, okay, apparently I got fight, flight, and giggle. Like those are my three responses. And but all that really just to say the leaning into the pain teaches you something about yourself. It's something that a lot of people don't understand. And in the military understands that you have to know that about yourself. And so they create this training environment where they're like, all right, some people didn't ever have this kind of experience growing up, and you're about to get it now. And because the time might come at some point in your career where you're going to have to rely on the things that you learn here, that you learn about yourself in order to survive. And so I think there are genuine, legitimate, beautiful life lessons to be learned by leaning into the pain.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I forgot about it. I was thinking about it this morning, but I wanted to talk about SEER School. I appreciate you bringing that in. I totally forgot, but I had plans to ask you about that. So perfect tie-in. Brownie, when you're looking in the mirror in our old apartment and blood is coming out of your eye and you're patching it up, and we're all kind of reliving, like walking through the experience again, what's going through your head? Because like not just that moment, but the kid in our parking lot, the super tall one that you cracked in the face, fight after fight after fight, you always came back. I mean, you weren't always scuffed up, but you always had a smile on your face. You were always like pumped. I mean, you were like trembling with adrenaline. What's going through your mind in those moments, and how does that relate to the discussion we've been having about leaning into pain and the benefits of physical pain?
Yeah, I think it takes you out of your ordinary life. Pain, and especially because pain is just something that we naturally just avoid, right? But it kind of makes you feel alive. In when we think about pain, we think, naturally want to avoid it. But then when it happens, you're kind of like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And like Alan said, you kind of lean into it. I guess even maybe I'm a little bit crazy, but pain is a little bit addictive for me. I mean, right? That's why most of us end up going to the gym, and we like to be sore, and we like it when our legs hurt, and we like it when our arms hurt. There's a little bit of an addictive. It's a little addictive, and it really does. It makes you feel accomplished. Again, to piggyback off of Alan and Justin, it makes you feel accomplished. It makes you figure out who you are. Even when the narrator and Tyler first have their fight, and they're sitting on the curb and they're all bloodied up, and he goes, "We should do this again." Like that line is just so applicable. There's so many fights that after my fights, I've been like, "We should do this again." This was sweet. I'm ready to go again with somebody else. There's something very addictive about it.
I love that. That was very well said. And you reminded me of I did, I'm sure we all read the IMDb trivia on this movie. One thing I found interesting was that, or maybe I heard this on a podcast. It might have been a podcast, but Brad Pitt and Edward Norton watched a lot of MMA tape. One thing, Drew and I and our other brother Zane, we say this all the time. The UFC has almost ruined movies for us, because if a fight's too clean, if it's too choreographed, it's like it's hard to believe, because we're immersed as fans of the UFC, as fans of MMA, as practitioners of, you know, jiu-jitsu. Like we're immersed in this world, and so when we see like a Hollywood version of a fight, it's kind of like I really have to tap into my suspension of disbelief, because it's just like that's not how fights are. What I respect about this movie is the UFC wasn't even that, it hadn't even been bought by Zuffa yet. It wasn't even like really largely on the map. But Brad Pitt, David Fincher, he wanted the fights to be as realistic as possible. And so they watched a lot of MMA tape. And again, watching this movie yesterday, being a UFC fan for well over 10, 15 years, whatever it's been, it feels real. Like they are like swinging, the hits aren't clean. They take each other to the ground. There's grappling, and it's like, and the cuts are really bad. Like nothing bugs me more than a movie where a person keeps getting hit in the face and they're a little rosy cheeked. It's like, no, your face gets split. And this movie does such a good job of like illustrating split faces and broken teeth and like just the violence. But my point in saying all this isn't necessarily just to praise the fight scenes. What I love is after the fights, when they give each other a hug and they pick each other up and they pat each other on the back, and like there's this camaraderie. And again, sorry, it's just personal experience, anecdotes, things I've observed. One thing I noticed about Brownie is when he gets in these fights, gosh, the one when we were in the parking lot outside of our apartment, these kids had followed us home. One that like we walk up to the car because we're like, what do you guys want? And the driver gets out, and he's probably 6'7". Brownie, how tall are you? 5'9"? So about that, yeah. So he's towering over Brownie, and and he thought, this like tall blonde giant thought that just by stepping out of the car that we'd all be like, oh, he's big and tall. Like we didn't mean anything. He thought that he could intimidate his way out of the situation. And Brownie goes right up, like forehead to the guy's chest, and he looks up at him and he's like, you ready for this? And the guy's like, what are you going to do? Brownie's like, I'm going to hit you. Are you ready? And Brownie literally like articulates what he's about to do. He's like, get ready. I'm going to hit you. And the guy's like, yeah, you're going to hit me. I'm ready. Yeah, I'll see. And he's like looking down at Brownie. Brownie's like, get ready. Here it comes. Here it comes. And the guy's just like shaking his head, smiling, thinking that he's intimidating Brownie. And the crack, there was a jab and a crack. And I'll never forget the sound of that crack when Brownie hits the kid on the bridge of his nose. And it's just like the loudest. And the kid reels back. Brownie does a double leg takedown, takes him down to the ground. And his passenger in his car like starts to get out. And I'm like, I squared up with him. I'm like, you want some too? He's like, no, I don't get in trouble. I'm like, well, then enjoy the show. I literally said those words as we were watching Brownie like on the ground hitting this guy. And I remember, I was saying like, Brownie, you know what to do. Like he's got you in a guillotine, pass to the other side. I'm kind of talking him through it, but Brownie's, he practiced jiu-jitsu in high school. He knew what he's doing. Anyway, Brownie gets in the mount on this guy and like pops him once and then grabs him by the collar and says, you done? Like, have you had enough? And I remember I was kind of mad. I was like, this guy followed us to our house. Like he obviously wanted to get violent. He thought that he could intimidate. Like I wanted Brownie to just like knock him unconscious. But Brownie showed mercy once he was in like a dominant position. This kid, like his nose is busted. He's got blood coming down. He's got blood in his mouth. And Brownie grabs him by the collar. He's like, you done? Like, are we done here? And the guy's like, yeah, man, I'm done. I didn't even want to fight. What? And he's like bleeding. And so Brownie gets up and he offers him his hand. He's like, get up. And so he claps and picks the guy up and he like grabs the guy by his shoulder. He's like, we good? We good, bro? And the guy's like, yeah, man, I didn't even want to fight. And he's like, well, like, it was a good match. So go home. This was fun. And when Brownie did that, I was like, what a great, like, because I wasn't in the fight, I wanted it to go further and I wanted more pain, more violence to be inflicted. But Brownie, because he was in it and he had already established his dominance, he had that moment that we see illustrated over and over and over again in Fight Club, where it's like, and we see that in the UFC as well. These guys trash talk and like hate each other's guts leading up to the fight. Afterwards, they hug. What is it? Callum, I want to pass it to you. And after Chase's comment, but Callum, I want to pass it to you. What is it? What is the psychology in a man's brain that makes fighting actually solve problems? A lot of people think violence doesn't solve any problems. Why do we do it then? And why are there situations like Brownie had, or situations that we see in Fight Club, or situations that we see in the UFC, where it's only after a physical confrontation, only after physical violence, that men can reconcile their differences? What is that? Callum, I'll let you stew on that for a moment. Chase, what was your thought?
Yeah, it's just it's funny because that was like what the fourth rule of Fight Club, right? Where it's like a fight will go as long as it needs to, right? And so as you were talking, I'm like the fight only needed to go for him to submit. If it needed to go to a knockout, it would go to a knockout, right? And I think that's one of those other things where a lot of people don't realize. You know, I've been in like, I don't know, 2 or 3 fights in my life, and it's like they go as long as they need to, and then once it's done, it's done. And you try to get over it and don't hold grudges and whatever, but the fight's gonna go as long as the fight needs to go. And anyways, as you were kind of talking through that story, that was just what popped in. It's like a fight will go as long as it needs to.
Amen. Love it. Callum, what are your thoughts?
It depends. I think it depends on what kind of fight it is. If it's like just 2 guys that are wanting to scrap in the middle of the street or at school or whatever, then it's almost like a respect thing as well. Like, even though someone might dominate the fight, even though someone might like win the fight outright, there's an automatic respect that you would have for the other person because they were willing to fight, you know. Whereas so many other people are uninterested, completely on that story that I shared before. But one of the first fights I've ever been in, the guy that I was fighting, I later became like close friends with. Even though me and him were like enemies at one point. We played for the same football team, and we went out and we got into so much trouble together after that. And we always knew from that first fight that we had with each other, we always knew after that we were willing to go toe to toe with anybody, you know. So I think there's that, and then there's also the aspect of ultimately if you take away everything, and you're just left with 2 men to sort out the differences. Like, ultimately, whoever has the better, whoever wins the fight is basically on top. Doesn't matter what it is, you know. That's why, like, back in the olden days when kings used to go out to battle as well, you know, the kings used to go out to battle, or else they used to send their best warrior, because ultimately wars are fought. Different ideologies are defeated through violence. Like, that's what it comes down to. Even today, like what happens in the Middle East, it's not people in offices that are sorting out what ideology is going to win. It's people in the war zone, you know. So if no one is willing to come to an agreement verbally, then ultimately it goes back to that old barbaric view of whoever's the best fighter wins the argument, you know.
That thought comes into my mind a lot, where I'm like, this has been like ingrained into our DNA since the beginning of time. It is like whoever's more skilled at violence wins the day. They get their way, and that's how it's always been up until like the last 100 years or so. And you know, I'm glad that it's different now, because you know, at the end of the day, I think that the better idea should prevail, despite, you know, the physical force behind the idea. I think that ideas are more powerful than force, and I like the way things are. But for generations, it was exactly the way you said. And even in some instances today, you know, if you do get in a scrap, if you do, you know, go head to head with another dude, for example, on the street, you know, whoever wins. Dustin, what were you going to say?
The time is getting far spent, so I wanted to get a few things that I had, and I wanted to see if you guys felt the same way I did, because I was looking for a twist. I haven't really seen. I found one person online that had this thought, and when I was looking at the movie, I can't believe nobody. I mean, maybe you guys, since you've seen it 100 times, you can, refute this or attest to this. But I think Marla is also a figment of his imagination, and that because she's walking into traffic, they're not honking at her. She only, that scene that Drew was saying where, he's like, I'm in the middle of this 6 year old, I'm 6 years old again and I'm talking. She goes out of the room. Brad Pitt comes in. He goes out of the room. She comes back in, and they're the only time that they're together, is kind of during their extracurricular activities. But Brad Pitt was saying that was, what did he say? Self-improvement is the M word, right? And so that every time they're doing that in the rubber glove. So I get that's what I saw. And that the table that was blown up out of the IKEA furniture is a yin yang, and that his fear of death is what brought on her. And then this is the whole thing about imbalance, so that you have this neurotic where every time she's called, she's like, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna take pills, and he's like, I want anarchy, I want to fight. And it's that balance in between us where you need both, but you need to keep them both in check, because Brad Pitt, Tyler Durden, he's all about fascism going to the extreme, and then she's in the depression in the extreme. So I just wanted to hear you guys' thoughts. Have you ever considered that Marla was also a figment? Because she never really talks to anybody. I mean, she makes an off comment of the police, but they don't really react to her. So that the only time she reacts is to the main character as well.
Drew, let's have you take this one. What do you think?
I've heard that before, and while watching it, I could see. I've heard it before, and then I must have read something that debunked it. I can't remember how it debunked it, but I was watching it this time with that, and I agree. Like the cars like screeching, but like driving around her isn't necessarily a give that she's a real person. It just same thing with Tyler Durden. Edward Norton was sitting there yelling at nobody. The only thing that it's justifiable, and I can my suspension of disbelief can make it so. But the only thing that I would argue is like Tyler Durden as the narrator and them switching back and forth. They're both males, and they both like show that aggressive side of them. Versus when anybody saw Marla, I mean, it's a girl, and so I would just imagine there would be a different response if Edward Norton was talking like a girl and talking about, just like acting the way Marla was acting in front of like the other members of the Fight Club. But again, there were so many instances where a good example is when they're like, when he's like, hey, what's going on here? And then the room of the guys start laughing. They're like, first rule of Project Mayhem is we don't talk about Project Mayhem. And he's a little confused, and all of them kind of like take it as a joke. So that kind of tells me, well, what if he was like talking like a girl, and they were just like, oh, he's just weird because he's always talking to himself. So, and he has all of that. He has all that cloud of mystery around him that they mentioned when they're like, yeah, this guy, he wasn't even born. He only sleeps 1 hour a night. And like, so there is this mystery of Tyler Durden. So it could be, and I didn't see anything concrete that would say, no, she's absolutely not, except maybe when he puts the gun in his mouth and kills Tyler Durden, why wouldn't have that killed Marla as well?
It's a good point. I think to address the male female thing, Justin kind of hit it on the head with the yin yang. What's interesting about Tyler Durden is he's who the narrator wants to be, but Marla is like the yin to his yang, even in terms of gender. If this theory is correct, which, you know, the genius of this movie, and, you know, we will wrap. I've said everything I want to say. So if anybody else wants to bring anything before we wrap this up, the floor is yours. But one thing I will say, just as a final note on my part, is the genius of this movie is it's one of those things where, have you ever taken like a college course, like on Shakespeare, for example, or, you know, Henry David Thoreau, you know, pick your literary genius, and you are dissecting the book or the chapter or the words or the literature, and there's so much meat, and eventually you take a step back and you're like, there's no way, you know, Thoreau even like was even aware of how deep this actually goes. Like, we are so over analyzing this that he would probably be shocked by some of our conclusions. But that doesn't like delegitimize trying to come to those conclusions or analyzing the text. I think this movie is a great example of a film. The reason why it's so rewatchable is because it was made in such a way, it's like lightning in a bottle. It's made in such a way that stuff like this, what Justin just brought up about Marla potentially being a figment of the imagination, and the movie offering leniency or credence to that theory to the point where it's actually a debate. And that's one of 100 different things that we can analyze from this movie. There's not a discussion forum long enough where we could really dissect and dig into all of the layers and philosophies and cinematography and like movie trivia and what was going on behind the scenes and what's going on in the movie. And like, was David Fincher even aware at how many layers there are here? Or did he just, like I said, catch lightning in a bottle? Did he just make this movie and it just so happened to have so much nuance and so much mystery and so many different ways to interpret the story and the philosophy that it just somehow it just hit? You'll never get another movie like this. It was brilliant in terms of the way that we're able to dissect and analyze it. So anyway, appreciate you bringing that up, Justin. But like I said, I'm pretty sure we touched on all the points I wanted to. Is there anything anybody feels would be a crucial talking point before we wrap this up? Go ahead, Drew.
Maybe not crucial talking point, but just like a little thought experiment I like to do is, especially when you get a character like Tyler Durden, like he's like a one in 1,000, I feel like, of a character where, Bo, you mentioned it when you were reading the book, and anytime Tyler Durden was talking, you were like, that was Brad Pitt. Like, there is nobody else that could have done it like Brad Pitt. But little fun thought exercise I like to do is like, who would you choose? If you had to choose somebody else, not Brad Pitt, who could you choose? And I was like, my vote would be Jason Statham. You know, just because he'd be like, I'll go to the Fight Club. What's the job? You know, and then I quickly decided not Jason Statham. But I'm like, when you have such an iconic character like Tyler Durden that was played by Brad Pitt, like, who could do better than him? I draw blanks. And so I'm just wondering if you guys, who would you choose if you had to recast Tyler Durden? Who would you choose?
1999, Tom Cruise. That's who I'd put in there, because he's crazy enough and like he's like diverse enough that I think he would just like he's like he would so get into the role. It would be a different character. Don't get me wrong. It'd be more of a what was that movie? What was the movie where he was the bad guy and with Jamie Foxx? Right? Yeah, thank you, Collateral. Right, like Collateral would be a good example. I kind of pictured that version of Tom Cruise where he's just like a little bit more off kilter. But and so like yeah, that would be my vote. 99, Tom Cruise.
He did that movie. It's called Far and Away. Remember? He's fighting. I think he's Irish though, right? So Callum can't watch that movie.
Apparently, Russell Crowe was in the talking for taking that role. But then that would have been at the same time they chose to go with Brad Pitt. And if it was Russell Crowe, then it would have been the same time they were filming Gladiator. So Russell Crowe wouldn't have been Gladiator, which it all worked out in the end because Russell Crowe is perfect in Gladiator and Brad Pitt is perfect.
Yeah, like that. Russell Crowe is the Gladiator. So like, who could you recast? You know. Anyways, I think Brad Pitt. This one's particularly difficult, just because of the impact that Brad Pitt had as Tyler Durden, and so I thought it'd be interesting. Tom Cruise would give his all for sure. So I could second that.
Go for it, Chase.
So here's my parting thought. Was I had this cinematic dream when they cast Edward Norton as Bruce Banner in The Incredible Hulk, that they would cast Brad Pitt as Captain America, and then in an Avengers movie, Edward Norton would turn to Brad Pitt and go, "I want you to hit me as hard as you can." And he goes, "What?" And he goes, "I want you to hit me as hard as you can." And like, it would bring it full circle. Oh man, that was like in my mind. I'm like that. And especially when they cast Edward Norton as the Hulk, right? I'm like, that would be like one of the greatest callbacks that you could do in cinema that you possibly could. Anyways, and then they recast Edward Norton, and Brad Pitt clearly wasn't Captain America. But I'm like, how great of a cheer would you have in an Avengers movie where like Hulk needs to come out and Edward Norton just turns to Brad Pitt, "I want you to," right? Like, how great would that be? Anyways, like, this movie set that up, and then it didn't happen. But like, in my mind, I'm like, that would have been a perfect movie moment.
I don't think I've agreed with you more in my life than listening to that, Chase. We've gone 33 years, and I don't think I've agreed with you more a single day than right now.
I've said it. I've already said it, so I won't rehash too in depth. But when we were talking about Seven, I think it was Seven, or maybe we're talking about The Game. But I already said how Brad Pitt is similar to like Denzel. Like, there's Denzel Washington. There's like a few actors in Hollywood that can just absolutely encapsulate a scene with just their presence. And Brad Pitt's one of those guys. And I feel like on all the podcasts I listen to on this movie Fight Club, a lot of people have said that this was what made Brad Pitt, like, up until then, up until this movie. I mean, he was good. You know, he was in Seven. He was in, I think, Legends of the Fall beforehand. He was in Meet Joe Black. He was in, obviously, Thelma and Louise, I think was his first movie. Anyway, but this one is like, you think Brad Pitt, you think Fight Club. Like, somehow this was like his pinnacle of achievement. Like, the fact that he landed this role and then did as well as he did, like, so iconic. It's just, like, again, lightning in a bottle. I can't express enough how perfect the casting was, the acting was, the movie. Some people said the movie is too long. I thought the pacing was great. I'm not bored at all during the movie. Yeah, so that's my thought. I can't imagine anybody other than Brad Pitt. As fun as a thought exercise it is, he was the perfect cast for this role.
Right. That's why this one's so interesting to me, is because it's so difficult. And of course, it wouldn't be Brad Pitt unless he was eating. And the only time that you got that iconic Brad Pitt was over the phone, and he was eating chips or something, and it was like, and like he over exaggerated because he couldn't see his big old puffy lips and him licking his lips while he was eating, like he does in all of his other movies. And he still pulled it off. I was like, whatever he's eating, whatever that empanada is or whatever, I'm in. That sounds delicious.
It's way too crunchy to be an empanada.
He fried that
both
chip
sides.
that Dad's always eating, like a Munchos or Crunchos? No, it's that weird chip that he always buys at gas stations.
It's like,
You guys know
Yeah,
what-
Munchos, the red bag. There's like 8 of them in a giant bag this big.
Yeah, but that is a super crunchy chip, right? And I could just imagine him eating Munchos. Yeah.
All right, Callum, we'll let you have the last word unless anybody has anything that's just like really killing, like you're dying to say it. Okay, go ahead, Justin.
So like you were saying, when you look at art, it says more about the interpreter than the artist. And so again, in 10 years, you're going to view this differently when you have teenagers, and you're going to view it differently when they're teaching their boys and your grandfather, and et cetera, et cetera. So it'll be interesting to see in 10, 20 years what things will pop out. And so me, midlife crisis age, I got the, I'm wanting Marla to be a figment of his imagination too, and even the entire Fight Club. And that's why they're all chanting at the end, even though they're all these cities, they know his name. But this is something that Jordan Peterson said about Fight Club, is that the need for men to have rough play, and they need to be consciously dangerous. And the fact that males need to know that they're capable of certain things, and the only way to do that is to fight or to break something, or get a little, I guess, nonconformist, to blaze their own path. But that if you're kind of like the Edward Norton character and you're not realizing you're hurting people, that's actually the true danger, right? Is you harness your natural tendencies and you bridle your passions, as we've heard. That I think that was the overall message I got from this movie is Brad Pitt's necessary, but you gotta reel it in, or else you become the opposite end. Because I mean, everybody was shaving their head. They had no names. They were just following. They were drones. I think it was something about the drone bees are in charge of the queen or something like that. What he was writing, like, we can let our passion, our violence overtake us, and then we're no better than the capitalist society that he was bucking against.
Actually, I think that's the best note to end on. Does anybody disagree? Dustin, that was beautiful. Thank you, man. But it's nearing 2 a.m. for you East Coasters, so let's wrap this up. This was fun, boys. We'll be back for the next David Fincher movie in a couple of weeks, and
Panic Room.
remember, Panic Room, is that what's next? Cool.
Yep.
Well, I will just end this by saying, first rule of Fight Club. As a matter of fact, let's not even post this on YouTube. Yeah, let's put the rule. All right. Have a good night, you guys. We'll see you.
Okay, boys.
Good boys.
Yeah.
Night.